Welcome to the Scaleup Valley podcast, where we bring the best of the best to help you scale your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is a very special guest. Her name is Amelia Townsend, the principal at Burda Principal Investments. Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you again.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. And for the ones who don't know you yet, it would be great to get to know more about your career and about Burda Principal Investments as well, of course.
Absolutely. So an introduction on me. So I've worked in consumer-focused venture capital for around 6 years now. At Unilever Ventures previously, and now at Burda Principal Investments. And prior to this, I was working in mergers and acquisitions strategy consulting for around 4 years. And I also founded a nonprofit focused on women in business prior to that. And perhaps to share a little bit more about Burda Principal Investments. So BPI is a global growth investor into scalable technology platforms. So BPI is really all about partnering with companies to help them to scale. And there's a really strong platform expertise in our team, as well as a deep consumer expertise. So the team's invested and worked with companies like Etsy, Vinted, Skillshare, Zalingo. And we have a truly global approach to scaling. So even our investment professionals are comprised around 5 offices around the world. So in London, Munich, Singapore, Berlin, and Boston. And what I think is quite unusual is that we all sit together every 2 weeks in our global investment committee, albeit virtually.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we all share learnings from the different portfolio companies, thinking about the cross-geographic perspectives. And I think that's really an exceptional platform for scaling. And I think Burda understands scale from a number of different angles. So that's obviously geography, but also product and technology teams, strategy. So I think it's a really fantastic platform. And in the UK right now, so in London where I am based, we have a strong focus on marketplaces, consumer fintech, consumer healthcare, and that's with companies selling B2B2C as well as directly to consumers and small businesses.
Got it. That's amazing. That's an impressive track record, and some of the companies that you had the opportunity to work with and to partner with in this exciting scaling up journeys, right?
Yes.
With a lot of victories, with a lot of learning points. And we always discuss here on the show 3 critical ingredients to scale. Our audience is already familiar with that. So number 1, radical focus. Number 2, world-class leadership / team, as I like to call it. And number 3, culture of execution. So let's start with my favorite topic. The ones who've been listening to the show for the last 160 plus episodes know that I'm completely obsessed about this one. Still, I love the other ones too, and especially the world-class team. But I saw so many patterns working well and working not so well in this point that I think this is kind of we know that what we are trying to do as venture-backed companies and on these journeys, the odds are against us. So I'm a firm believer that at least let's do well what we can control. And there are some principles that we should not be disrupting because this is already proven. And one of those is to avoid to be everything to everyone. So having a clear understanding of our core customers and being able to have a narrative that gets us closer to the vision is really important in our point. So the idea would be to leverage your experience in terms of how do we balance the focus and the scale, in the sense that those kind of companies, they need to have a global mindset, but they can go global to everywhere at the same time. So, and when you close kind of the geographies, for instance, or even in the industries, it depends on the different variables of focus. You are also decreasing the avenues of growth. So it is very counterintuitive. So the mind will tell us if we open up the variables, we will have more chances to scale. So this is the kind of the growth paradox, and it's very counterintuitive. So what is your experience with that in terms of balance, focus and scale? And feel free to double down on geographies, because I know that you have a lot of insights there.
Brilliant. It's such an interesting topic. I'm glad we're thinking and talking about it. So, yeah, I mean, I think just overall, and maybe I can share some experiences and examples,
Absolutely.
But I think, of course, focus and scale are inextricably linked. So one has to focus in the most important areas at the right time to actually scale successfully. For example, so that you don't multiply out any key fixes you might already have in one geography to multiple geographies. So I think this is a delicate balance, and a balance between being ready to scale, but also not perfecting what you have too much so as to miss the market opportunity. So it's definitely a key question. I think overall, in all areas of focus and scale, data really is your friend. So it helps you to understand what direction to take. Likely with the businesses we work with, it's around customer metrics and behavior, giving you signals, alongside, of course, any of the key strategic theses you have on the market. And I think one of the key initial areas to focus on for a company getting ready to scale is getting that data and insights engine in place. And that could now be by using, many of the third parties out there who can enable that. But really building the capability there to have immediate data in a simple and accessible way and actually across the company. And an example of a portfolio company who we've seen doing that really well from day one, and scaling excellently is Bloom and Wild. So, and there are numerous others. So I think data and the data engine to start with is really important. I think the other area of focus that we've seen to be important to drive scale is some of the key drivers in your product or tech. So for marketplaces, we see searchability as key. So for example, Etsy really focused on their search functionality, and able to press the button on scale successfully across geographies, but then also to keep iterating this as they scaled. And they saw really fantastic results from this approach. Then another area of focus we see at our stage is, and this relates to the point you mentioned earlier, I think really doubling down on your customer insights and maybe even a particular group of stakeholders, to ensure that the proposition really resonates with them while you scale or before you scale. And I think an interesting example of this that we've seen in marketplaces is a focus on the supply side as well as the demand side. So really understanding what does the supply side want. Because that basically really accelerates your scale, accelerates the flywheel. An example of this, I think, would be Zalingo in our portfolio, who really listened to their suppliers and built out additional propositions to create value there. And maybe just talking more generally, that could be things like, working capital, it could be tech assistance with websites, it could be shipping and labels, it could be marketing volume support. So all sorts of areas where you can really focus for that supply side. And then, monetization model, it's an obvious one, but I think knowing that the monetization model you're scaling with is the one that helps you to scale most effectively, I think is important. So maybe testing out and iterating on a couple of different models while you scale or before you scale, I think is important. And expanding geographically, I know we touched on that earlier. I think there's a few ways to do this. So again, going back to data, understanding the data in the country that you're in, understanding the customer metrics in order to inform scale in another geography. There's always going to be differences, especially around acquisition and exact proposition, but does your product enable customers to repeat with you? Have you really kind of nailed that product market fit? I think is important before multiplying out across numerous geographies. I think also what we've seen that's quite successful is testing in a market first, whether that's the one you actually want to scale into, whether that's one that's kind of similar, to really take some learnings there and then enable more effective scaling when you really push on that in a key geography. And I think, I mean, maybe linked to what we talked about earlier, really looking at your data to understand where you might have network effects that you can amplify, I think is really important to scale. So focusing at quite a granular level on what your customers are doing. So for example, with Vinted, they noticed that their sellers were becoming buyers and that their buyers were becoming sellers. So this was a key insight for them to basically make sure the product reflected that switch back and forth in a customer effective way, and also then to amplify that in their marketing. So yeah, I think those were my initial thoughts on all the different areas to focus on to enable scale.
There's your absolutely amazing insights and food for thoughts and for reflection. To be frank, during our conversations, I'm always still writing down and thinking at the same time as we are speaking. And something that I really enjoy about what you said, and maybe we could almost double down there, but it's just a reflection for our audience, which is what you said about data. So sometimes I see in some of my conversations with the CEOs and leadership teams that sometimes we would like to change the data. I mean, we don't want to recognize that there is some markets or geographies or segments that are working better than others, and we are so obsessed in making a specific customer segment or a specific geo to work better that we try to improve the metrics of that segment instead of doubling down on the ones that are already working. So it seems that we are attached to a certain assumption and we are not able to get out of the assumption, get perspective, and just double down on what the market is telling us. We love this. We love the product. We want more of this. So please serve me. But at the same time, sometimes it's complicated because sometimes we have the vision and the data is not yet there. So we still need to go through this iteration process that you're talking about until we find out a way that it could work, or to realize that, yes, we had the wrong assumption, it will not work out, and we need to pivot and change our strategy or our customer base. Any tips there about how to understand when we need to be data driven and very data obsessed and get out of our assumptions, and when we need to be more vision oriented and believing that the data will follow the vision?
It's a great thought, and it's definitely tough in practice. I mean, I think my initial thought would be thinking clearly about, okay, this is our strategic hypothesis. What are the tests that we can run to inform us as to whether we still believe in this or we need to iterate on that? So I think at the outset being clear on, okay, these are the different signals that we would see which would positively enforce that point, or these are some of the signals which would be important to us to take notice of to maybe negatively or positively iterate on that thesis. So I think being clear about the tests and what the important metrics are is the way to go there. But it's of course an incredibly delicate balance and something to work through.
It's curious because I like a lot an expression from Tony Robbins in a different context, but also applies here, which is the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
So what we are kind of discussing, and especially the 3 principles that we discuss on the show, is if you do this, usually things get better. So you have more probabilities of succeeding. It doesn't mean that you will succeed, because we know the odds of being able to scale a business from 0 to 100 million in revenues. But at the same time, there are some nuances that are different from company to company. So there is kind of an art, right? So it's great that, again, the science of achievement, if we follow the data, or at least if we know well the data that we have and our customer base, we have more chances of succeeding. But if we are not able also to follow the vision and the intuition, we also might fall in a trap. So, which is always a very delicate balance, as you said, to follow. So let's move into the world, or even doubling down a little bit more here, because I like so much this topic. Sorry about that. It's also important to discuss, and I think it is also interesting in the marketplace's perspective, from a scale up that comes, for instance, from Europe. So kind of doubling down on expanding first in Europe versus the US, and knowing that the US, in principle, the scale would be a little bit easier language wise, and in Europe we are having this discussion again and again and again. So it's part of the ecosystem, the differences of scaling in Europe and the US. That's not what we want to cover here. But what is your experience in terms of usually these options? Of course, it depends on the company, but scaling through Europe or scaling through the US. I was just listening yesterday a case of in TechCrunch that I don't remember the name, that the entrepreneurs just got an investment round, and they were saying, we will double down in Europe because we have a very strong competitors in the US, and it will be very difficult for them to crack Europe. So what we want to do is to build exactly the same business model across Europe and be in a good position to be the major player in Europe. So I know the question is very redundant and very open, but what are your thoughts in terms of the US Europe kind of discussion that is always alive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for us, thinking globally, it's about timing. So which market at which time. And we are really excited about companies with global ambitions who would like to win in their home market, expand to the US, expand to Europe, expand to Asia eventually. So we're interested in all markets. I think it does come down to where are the customers who you can serve best at that time. So if it's the case that there are customers in America who would be very excited about the proposition, and there's a competitive window in the market, then and that's more advanced as a competitive market, or more intense or saturated than Europe, then maybe US first, then Europe. If it's a case of actually there being a window or opening in Asia at the time with the consumers, that I think can also be an option. So I think it comes down to your market and your customers, in my view. And then, as you mentioned, of course, US can be very, it's very large, and it's as you say, the same language, so there can be some scale there. But if it's very saturated in terms of competitors, then what you gain in the kind of less complexity on that side of things, actually you may lose in like marketing spend. So I think it's just worth balancing those pieces. And then I think, I think it depends by sector as well, because, and maybe an example would be healthcare, consumer healthcare, selling B2B2C. The structure of the market is very different in US versus Europe, very different in each European country. So wherever your starting point is, it also depends where you think makes most sense to scale in terms of your distribution channel synergies if you're B2B2C rather than fully B2C. So I think there's a number of considerations, and the number one thing for me would be serving the customers in your home market really, really well, at whatever scale you decide that is, so that can inform you in other geographies.
That's great. So moving into the second ingredient to scale, which is the world-class team / leadership, we can also include culture here. We know one of the pains of any company that is growing very quickly is that they are a different company every single quarter, or at least every single year. So if we have this goal of doubling, tripling revenues every year, we are always in an internal crisis. And we need to adapt also the design of the organizations, and we need to be able to keep the DNA of the culture alive as you scale. So what are some of your considerations and experiences around having the right people on the right seats, having the right culture in place, and helping everyone to be on the same page and working together as a team, and avoiding the siloed mentality that usually starts when we get to a certain stage of growth?
Yeah. I mean, I think team is completely central to every business, and everything comes from team and team culture, in my view. So maybe just starting with one of the building blocks, which would be team structure, to your point around getting the right people in the right seats. So we think that this has to be thought about very strategically. So thinking through what the business needs now, and then what it will need in the near future, to ensure that you have the right organization ready to go when you need it, and you're not lagging team in terms of what you need to achieve. And I think that talking to some analogous company structures, other founders, can be really helpful. We actually run organization design insights across our portfolio, and we include external public company data as well, to answer questions like what can the different structures look like, which were most successful, what can the different C-suite structures and roles look like, what types of different cost structures are there, how many people in tech, how many people in marketing, how many people in product at different stages. And we really think that's an important part of, I guess, where we invest when teams are looking to really use their growth equity to scale. And so we're talking about that a lot. Then I think aligned goals is probably one of the most important fundamental pieces. So basically that everyone in the team knows how they're contributing to the overall company goals and what KPIs they need to hit for the company to hit their overall KPIs, so that they feel part of the overall purpose of the company versus working in a silo. And I think this is something which has to really filter through the organization. So I think the C-suite needs to be clear on what the goals and the KPIs are. And I think it's so key that people in the organization know that when they hit a milestone, what impact that has on the overall company, and therefore how meaningful they are to that company. So I think this purposeful work and goals are really key to scaling fast and effectively. In terms of culture, each company has its own culture. I wouldn't be able to designate which is the most effective. Overall, it has to be authentic. So, and I think it's important the team are empowered and, again, are purposefully part of that company. I think in a time of remote working, as we are now, predominantly remote working, I think there are a lot of tools which enable companies to do their job effectively, like Zoom and Teams and others. I think there is a risk of a missing like social cohesion or collaboration layer. So I'm quite excited about companies like kind of Unlock and Homework and Rune, which are providing like a SaaS tool around that social interaction. And I'd probably encourage companies to look into those types of propositions to ensure that everyone's feeling socially connected. I mean, there's a lot of stats around, 80% of workers who are socially less connected have lower productivity. So I think that's something that's key in the time that we are operating in at the moment. And I think, we really believe in diversity as well, team diversity. So across our founders, 53% of our capital allocation goes to women-led businesses, for example. And we believe in investment diversity for our own company culture. So we have 44% women and 8 nationalities and 9 different languages spoken across our team. So I think that's also something that's important.
Well done. Absolutely, that's really great insights, and I love the opportunity there about the and what you expressed. It's really interesting that it's sometimes we forget this data, that it's proven that being connected socially increases productivity, and that it's definitely, and I think that we have all been facing that during this year and learning from that sometimes we feel much more productive maybe in the short term and at spaces because we are alone, but at the same time we feel more disconnected and kind of missing something. There is something missing that sometimes we don't know how to explain, and it's just sometimes even the moment to go to have a coffee with a colleague, and an informal coffee, not a scheduled coffee.
Exactly.
Right? And so you have already anticipated some of the very interesting stuff for the number 3 culture of execution. But I think one of the favorite questions of every single founder, but even more from anyone in an organization with very agile and very bold founders and executives that are able to, to come to the business one day and say, look, we will change everything and we will move into that direction. And maybe 1 week later, the same happens. So how do we overlap this feeling of being always changing the route that can also lead teams to burnout?
Yeah, it's a great question. A couple of things come to mind. I think one would be the company vision, whilst the how to get there can change. So the exact methodology of getting there, the really kind of high level company mission, in my view, usually remains the same, at least for a sustained amount of time. And so that can be really a guiding light of certainty where there is less certainty on the kind of how. And so that really provides, I think, like a certainty of a why piece and back to that purposeful work. So if the route to get there changes, I think there's more understanding and motivation around, okay, yes, we need to change how we get there because we're still getting to that ultimate goal, which we all believe in. So I think that's one way of balancing it. And then the other thing I think is just for example, CEOs, founders, CFOs, just to take the time and space to think in advance of what the different scenarios could be coming up. I know that's been exceptionally difficult, especially with COVID and everything there, but just thinking through what could the different scenarios be, what would that mean for the business, so that there's a sense of being kind of one step ahead as things change, and in a time where there may be less time to just take a quick step back and think about that, there's already been a bit of thinking around that.
I love it. Love it. I really, when there is uncertainty, the role of the leader is to create confidence, trust, and belief, hope and certainty, and you can always create certainty about the why. So I love the way you articulated it, and telling to companies, especially scale ups, we need to keep agile and we need to keep open to new ways of getting to the vision and to accomplish our mission as well. So, and if there is a better way, why not? Why do we need to be stuck to the same plan that we fought since the beginning? Because anyway, we are still moving into the direction of fulfilling the mission and the vision of the company and of course of the team. That's great insight. Amelia, we are getting to the end of the show, and I feel that we would have at least another hour of conversation to our audience. So, but that's a good excuse to have you back soon. And now we go into our favorite question, which is if you'd have the opportunity to meet yourself some years ago, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
It's a great question. I mean, we could spend a long time on this. I'm still, of course, learning and reflecting all the time, but maybe a few pieces that I pulled out. So I think especially the really younger self, getting yourself in the vicinity of people you can learn from, the most interesting, smartest, inspiring people you can, is important because you are learning from them every day. If I think about my first days in venture capital, I would tell myself that successful companies are so much about founders running those companies and the teams that come from that, and you cannot underestimate that. It's definitely something I would emphasize. I think it's really obvious, but emphasizing that companies go through highs and lows, and they're supporting the management teams through that and highlighting to them maybe other examples where people have got through those times is a key role that you can, or a key gift that you can give to companies that you're working with, having seen, a portfolio of companies. And yeah, just really supporting through that. I think also I would say speaking up and sharing your thoughts, whatever angle or level you are. There's a reason you're in a room to have a conversation, and everyone has something interesting to say as long as it's coming from an authentic place. I think that is something that I would also share.
That's an amazing reflection. Amelia, it was really a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for making the time to share your experience with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. And to our community, thanks for being on that side. We keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life a little bit easier, scaling your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. See you soon and keep scaling.